The Texas sun was beginning to hide behind the rolling hills when Willie Nelson parked his iconic blue van on the side of Highway 35 near Austin. At 89 years old, the legendary singer felt the weight of decades on the road in every aching joint. His calloused hands, which had played thousands of chords throughout his life, trembled slightly as he lit a hand-rolled cigarette. "Damn," he muttered to himself, watching the city lights in the distance. Austin had grown beyond recognition since his early days playing in local honky-tonks. Skyscrapers gleamed where open fields once stood, and the sound of traffic had replaced the cricket songs he remembered from his youth. Willie pulled out his cell phone, an old device he barely knew how to use, and squinted at the screen. 17 missed calls from his manager, Bobby Henderson, and countless text messages about upcoming tour dates, recording sessions, and media interviews. At nearly 90, the music industry still demanded everything from him. "Willie, you old fool," he said to his reflection in the van's side mirror. His weathered face showed every year of hard living. The lines carved by sun and cigarettes, the tired eyes that had seen too much, the silver braids that had become his trademark hanging limply over his shoulders. The phone buzzed again. Bobby Henderson's name appeared on the screen. "Willie, thank God you answered. Where the hell are you? The record label is going crazy. We have that meeting in Nashville tomorrow about the new album and—" "Bobby, slow down," Willie interrupted, taking a long drag from his cigarette. "I'm thinking of taking some time off." Silence on the other end. Then Bobby's voice, higher pitched. "Time off? Willie, you can't take time off. You're Willie Nelson. People are counting on you. The tour? The tour can wait." Willie watched a hawk circle overhead, riding the evening thermals with effortless grace. "I'm tired, Bobby. Really tired." "You've been tired before. You always bounce back. Look, just come to Nashville tomorrow. We'll figure this out." Willie hung up and turned off the phone. The silence that followed felt like a blessing. For the first time in months, maybe years, he could hear himself think. The hawk had disappeared, but its freedom lingered in his mind like a song he couldn't quite remember. He climbed back into the van and pulled out a crumpled envelope from his shirt pocket. The return address read, Sarah Whitehorse, Cherokee Nation Cultural Center, Broken Arrow, Texas. Inside, handwritten on simple paper, was an invitation that had arrived 3 weeks ago. "Dear Mr. Nelson, my name is Sarah Whitehorse, and I am an elder of the Cherokee community here in East Texas. My grandson, Daniel Running Bear, is a young musician who greatly admires your work. We would be honored if you would visit our community and perhaps share some music with us. We have much to learn from each other." The letter is an invitation, not a request. Come when your heart tells you to come. With respect, Sarah Whitehorse Willie had read the letter dozens of times, each reading revealing something new. There was something about its simplicity, its lack of demands or expectations that called to him. No contracts, no deadlines, no pressure. Just an invitation to share music. He started the van and pulled back onto the highway. But instead of heading toward Austin and the obligations waiting there, he turned east toward the small town of Broken Arrow. The decision felt both spontaneous and inevitable, like a chord change he'd been hearing in his head for years. The drive through East Texas unfolded like a country song. Small towns with single traffic lights, abandoned gas stations with rusted signs advertising long-forgotten brands, and endless stretches of pine forest broken by cattle pastures. Willie drove slowly, savoring the landscape that had shaped him as much as any music teacher. As night fell, he stopped at a roadside diner in the town of Marshall. The Red Rooster Cafe was exactly the kind of place he remembered from his early touring days. Vinyl booths patched with duct tape, a jukebox playing Hank Williams, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. "Well, I'll be damned," said the waitress. A woman in her 60s with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her name tag read Dorothy Mae Johnson. Willie Nelson himself. "What brings you to our little corner of nowhere?" "Just passing through, Dorothy Mae," Willie replied, settling into a corner booth. "Mind if I ask you something?" "Shoot. You know anything about the Cherokee community around Broken Arrow?" Dorothy Mae's face lit up. "Oh, you mean Sarah Whitehorse and her people? Wonderful folks. Sarah's been like a grandmother to half the town. Cherokee and white alike. Lost her husband, Thomas, about 5 years back, but she's kept that cultural center going strong. Her grandson, Daniel, now he's something special. Plays music like you wouldn't believe." "What kind of music?" "Traditional Cherokee songs mostly, but I've heard him play country too. Got a voice that could make a stone cry." Dorothy Mae poured Willie's coffee and sat down across from him. "You thinking of visiting them?" "Maybe." "Well, if you do, tell Sarah that Dorothy Mae sends her regards. That woman helped me through the darkest time of my life when my husband passed. Never asked for anything in return. Never made me feel like charity. That's the Cherokee way, I suppose." Willie sipped his coffee and studied Dorothy Mae's face. He'd met thousands of people in his decades of touring, but there was something about small-town folks that always struck him. They had a groundedness, a connection to place and community that the music industry had never quite understood. "What's the Cherokee way?" he asked. Dorothy Mae smiled. "Well, I'm not Cherokee myself, but from what I've learned from Sarah and her people, it's about balance. Taking care of each other, taking care of the land, understanding that we're all connected. Simple as that, complicated as that." Willie finished his meal in thoughtful silence. Outside, the Texas night was alive with sounds. Cicadas, distant train whistles, and the murmur of conversations from other late-night travelers. He paid his bill and left Dorothy Mae a generous tip, then continued east toward Broken Arrow. The Cherokee Cultural Center sat on 20 acres of rolling land outside the small town. Even in the darkness, Willie could see the care that had gone into the place. Well-maintained buildings that blended traditional and modern architecture, gardens that seemed to flow naturally into the surrounding forest, and pathways lit by solar lights that cast a warm, welcoming glow. Willie parked the van and sat for a moment, unsure of what to do next. It was nearly midnight, far too late for an unannounced visit. But as he reached for his keys to start the engine, a figure emerged from the largest building. An elderly Cherokee woman wrapped in a colorful shawl, walking with purpose despite her obvious age. She approached the van without fear or hesitation and knocked gently on the window. Willie rolled it down. "You must be Willie Nelson," she said, in a voice like honey over gravel. "I'm Sarah Whitehorse. I've been expecting you." Sarah Whitehorse led Willie through the cultural center with the quiet confidence of someone completely at home in her surroundings. The main building housed a museum, library, and community gathering space, all decorated with Cherokee art and artifacts that spoke of a culture both ancient and vibrantly alive. "How did you know I was coming?" Willie asked, following Sarah into a comfortable sitting area furnished with handmade chairs and a stone fireplace. "My grandmother always said that when you send a true invitation into the universe finds a way to deliver it." Sarah's eyes twinkled with humor. "Also, Dorothy Mae called from the Red Rooster about an hour ago." Willie couldn't help but smile. Small town network. The best kind. Sarah settled into a rocking chair and gestured for Willie to take the chair across from her. "Tea? Coffee would be better if you have it." "Of course." Sarah disappeared into a small kitchen and returned with 2 mugs of strong black coffee. She handed one to Willie and settled back into her chair. "So, Willie Nelson, what brings you to our little corner of the world? Besides my irresistible invitation, of course." Willie cupped the warm mug in his hands and considered the question. How could he explain the restlessness, the feeling that despite all his success, something essential was missing? How could he describe the emptiness that had been growing inside him? The sense that he was going through the motions of being Willie Nelson without remembering why it mattered? "I'm lost," he said finally. "Not geographically. Hell, I've been driving Texas roads for 70 years. But somewhere along the way, I think I forgot why I started playing music in the first place." Sarah nodded, as if this was the most natural confession in the world. "Music chose you early, didn't it? When I was 6 years old, my grandmother bought me my first guitar. Cost her $12 she couldn't afford. I played until my fingers bled, then I played some more. Music was everything. It was how I made sense of the world, how I connected with people, how I stayed sane. And now?" Willie set down his coffee and ran his hands through his braids. "Now it feels like work. Good work, meaningful work, but work all the same. The magic's gone, Sarah. I play the same songs, tell the same stories, and people love it, but I don't feel it anymore. I'm just performing." Sarah rocked slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "My husband Thomas used to say that when you lose your way, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to stay there, but to remember why you left in the first place. I'm not sure I remember the beginning. Then maybe it's time to learn someone else's beginning." Sarah stood and walked to a glass case displaying traditional Cherokee instruments, flutes, drums, rattles. "Our people have been making music for thousands of years. Long before Nashville, long before recording studios, long before anyone thought music could make you famous or rich." She returned with a simple wooden flute, its surface worn smooth by countless hands. "This was my grandfather's. He made it when he was about your age, actually. He'd lost his way too, spent years trying to be white, trying to fit into a world that would never fully accept him. Nearly lost his Cherokee identity in the process. What brought him back? Music. But not the music he'd been playing to please other people. The music his people had been playing for generations. The music that connected him to something larger than himself." Sarah held out the flute to Willie. "Would you like to hear it?" Willie nodded, and Sarah raised the instrument to her lips. The sound that emerged was unlike anything Willie had ever heard. Not the polished perfection of a recording studio, but something raw and honest and alive. The melody seemed to weave through the room like smoke, carrying with it stories of joy and sorrow, connection and loss, hope and endurance. When the last note faded, Willie sat in silence for a long moment. "That was beautiful, Sarah. What was it?" "A song about coming home. Not to a place, but to yourself." She offered the flute to Willie. "Try it." "I don't know Cherokee music." "Music is music. Your breath, the instrument, the intention. That's all any of it is." Willie took the flute hesitantly. He'd played harmonica his whole life, but this was different. Simpler in construction, but somehow more demanding. He raised it to his lips and blew softly. The sound was breathy, uncertain, nothing like Sarah's fluid melody. "Don't think so much," Sarah advised. "Just breathe into it. Let it find its own voice." Willie tried again, this time focusing less on producing a specific sound and more on the act of breathing itself. The flute responded with a clearer, more resonant tone. He played a few experimental notes, then found himself drifting into a simple melody that seemed to emerge from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. "There," Sarah said softly. "That's the sound of Willie Nelson. Not Willie Nelson the brand or Willie Nelson the legend, but just Willie, the person who picked up his first guitar because music called to him. Willie lowered the flute, surprised to find his eyes damp. I haven't felt that in years. Felt what? The music coming through me instead of from me, like I was just a channel for something bigger. Sarah smiled. That's how our ancestors understood music. Not as entertainment or art or even expression, but as connection. Connection to the earth, to the ancestors, to the Great Spirit, to each other. A sound from outside made them both turn. Footsteps on the porch, followed by a gentle knock. Sarah glanced at her watch. That'll be Daniel. He works late at the garage in town, but he always stops by to check on me. Maybe I should go. Nonsense. You need to meet my grandson. The young man who entered was clearly Cherokee, with his grandfather's strong features softened by youth and an easy smile. Daniel Running Bear looked to be in his late 20s, with calloused hands that spoke of mechanical work and kind eyes that missed nothing. "Grandmother," he said, kissing Sarah on the cheek, then stopped as he noticed Willie. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had company." "Daniel, I'd like you to meet Willie Nelson. Willie, this is my grandson, Daniel Running Bear." Daniel's eyes widened, but he recovered quickly and extended his hand. "Mr. Nelson, it's an honor. My grandmother's been hoping you'd visit. Please, call me Willie, and the honor's mine. Your grandmother tells me you're a musician." Daniel glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "I play some. Traditional songs mostly. But I grew up listening to your music. On the Road Again was the first song I learned on guitar. Is that right?" Willie smiled. "Mind if I ask you something, Daniel? What does music mean to you?" Daniel considered the question seriously. "Well, in Cherokee culture, we believe everything is connected. People, animals, plants, the earth, the sky. Music is how we remember those connections. When I play traditional songs, I can feel the presence of my ancestors, the wisdom they passed down. When I play country music," he paused, searching for words. "It helps me understand that connection exists in all kinds of music, if you know how to listen for it." Willie felt something stir in his chest, a recognition he hadn't experienced in years. "Would you play something for me?" Daniel looked to his grandmother, who smiled and nodded toward a guitar case in the corner. "Traditional or country? Surprise me." Daniel retrieved an acoustic guitar, not expensive or flashy, but clearly well-loved and carefully maintained. He tuned it quickly and efficiently, then closed his eyes and began to play. The song was entirely unfamiliar to Willie, yet somehow felt like something he'd always known. Daniel sang in Cherokee, his voice carrying a strength and clarity that reminded Willie of his own early recordings. The melody was haunting, built on minor scales that seemed to capture both sadness and hope in equal measure. When Daniel finished, Willie found himself applauding. Not the polite applause of a professional courtesy, but the genuine enthusiasm of someone who had just witnessed something remarkable. "That was extraordinary, Daniel." "What was it?" "A song about the Trail of Tears," Daniel replied quietly, "but also about survival, about carrying our culture forward despite everything that's tried to destroy it." Willie felt the weight of those words. Here was a young man who understood something Willie had been searching for without knowing it. The idea that music could carry history, could preserve memory, could connect people across generations and cultures. "Daniel," Willie said slowly, "how would you feel about teaching an old country singer something about Cherokee music?" Daniel's face lit up. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I came here because I felt lost, and your grandmother's already started showing me a new path. If you're willing, I'd like to learn more about your traditions, your songs, your way of understanding music." Sarah rocked in her chair, smiling with satisfaction. "I think that can be arranged. But Willie, I should warn you, Cherokee learning isn't like Nashville learning. We don't rush, we don't push, and we don't separate music from life. If you want to understand our songs, you'll need to understand our people." "I'd be honored to try." Daniel looked between Willie and his grandmother, excitement building in his voice. "We could start with the morning songs, the ones we sing to greet the sun. And there's a harvest celebration next week where the whole community comes together. If you stayed, I'll stay as long as you'll have me," Willie said, meaning it completely. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely excited about music again. Sarah stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the star-filled Texas sky. Thomas always said that when a person is ready to learn, the right teacher appears. "I think he would have liked you, Willie Nelson. I wish I could have met him." "You will, in a way. His spirit lives in our songs, in our stories, in the way we care for each other. That's the Cherokee way of understanding life and death. Nothing truly ends. It just changes form." Willie spent the next hour listening to Sarah and Daniel share stories about their community, their traditions, and their music. As the night grew deeper, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. A sense of belonging, of being exactly where he needed to be. When Sarah finally suggested they all get some rest, Willie realized he had nowhere to stay. The nearest hotel was probably 40 miles away, and the thought of leaving this place felt wrong. "There's a guest room here at the center," Sarah offered. "Nothing fancy, but clean and quiet." "I couldn't impose." "Willie," Sarah interrupted gently, "hospitality isn't an imposition in Cherokee culture. It's a responsibility. You're our guest, and we're honored to have you." As Willie settled into the simple but comfortable guest room, he felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Outside his window, he could hear the night sounds of rural Texas. Owls calling, leaves rustling in the breeze, the distant sound of cattle settling for the night. He thought about Bobby Henderson's frantic calls, about the meetings in Nashville, about the tour dates stretching endlessly into the future. All of that seemed to belong to a different world now. A world where Willie Nelson, the brand, was more important than Willie the person. Tomorrow he would begin learning Cherokee music. Tomorrow he would start to understand what Daniel meant about connection, and what Sarah meant about coming home to yourself. Tomorrow he would take the first step on a journey that would change everything. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Willie Nelson fell asleep without worrying about tomorrow at all. Willie woke before dawn, pulled from sleep by sounds he'd almost forgotten. Roosters crowing, birds greeting the sunrise, and the gentle murmur of voices somewhere outside his window. He dressed quietly in the clothes he'd worn the day before and stepped out into the cool East Texas morning. The Cherokee Cultural Center looked different in daylight, more expansive and purposeful. Gardens that had been shadows the night before revealed themselves to be carefully tended spaces where traditional Cherokee plants grew alongside modern vegetables. A few early risers moved through the grounds with quiet purpose, an elderly man tending to the gardens, a middle-aged woman hanging laundry on a line strung between two oak trees. "Morning, Willie." Daniel appeared from around the corner of the main building, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Grandmother thought you might be an early riser." "Old habits." Willie accepted the coffee gratefully. "This is beautiful, Daniel. How long has the center been here?" "About 15 years. After my grandfather passed, Grandmother decided our community needed a place to preserve and teach Cherokee culture. Started with just the main building and a few acres, but it's grown as more families got involved. They walked along a path that led through the gardens toward a small amphitheater built into a natural depression in the land. The seating was simple. Carved wooden benches arranged in a semicircle around a central fire pit, but the acoustics were perfect, designed to carry even whispered words to every listener. "We hold ceremonies here," Daniel explained. "Storytelling, music, community meetings. It's modeled after the traditional council grounds our ancestors used. Your grandmother mentioned morning songs last night." Daniel smiled and glanced toward the eastern horizon, where the sky was beginning to lighten. "Right on time. Come on." They were joined by other early risers. Sarah, the elderly gardener Willie had seen earlier, the woman with the laundry, and several others. Willie recognized the quiet gathering as something sacred, though he didn't yet understand its significance. "Morning songs are how we greet each day in Cherokee tradition," Sarah explained softly. "We sing to thank the sun for returning, to ask for guidance and strength, and to remember our connection to all living things." "Should I?" Willie began, but Sarah shook her head. "Just listen this morning. Feel the songs instead of trying to understand them." As the first sliver of sun appeared over the trees, Daniel began to sing. His voice was joined by the others, creating a harmony that seemed to rise naturally from the earth itself. Willie couldn't understand the Cherokee words, but he felt their meaning in his bones. Gratitude, reverence, hope, and a deep acknowledgement of humanity's place in the larger web of existence. The songs continued for perhaps 20 minutes, ending as the sun cleared the treetops and began to warm the amphitheater. The small group dispersed quietly, some heading toward the main building, others returning to their morning tasks. "How did that make you feel?" Sarah asked Willie as they walked back toward the center. Willie struggled to put the experience into words. "Like church," he said finally, "but not the kind of church where you sit in pews and listen to someone tell you what to think. The kind where you participate in something bigger than yourself." "That's a good description," Daniel agreed. Cherokee spirituality isn't about believing the right things or following the right rules. It's about relationship with the Creator, with the earth, with each other. Over breakfast, simple but delicious food prepared by community members, Willie met more of the Cherokee families who were part of the cultural center. Robert Ironcloud, a Vietnam veteran in his 70s, who taught traditional crafts to young people. Mary Sunflower, a retired teacher who ran the center's education programs. Tom Eaglefeather, a teenager who'd grown up in Dallas but came to the center every summer to learn about his Cherokee heritage. Each person Willie met had a story about finding their way back to Cherokee culture, often after years of trying to assimilate into mainstream American society. Their stories reminded Willie of his own journey, the way success in the music industry had gradually separated him from the simple joy of making music. "It's not that we reject modern life," explained Mary Sunflower as she showed Willie through the center's library. "We just believe it's important to remember where we come from, to maintain our connection to the wisdom of our ancestors." The library contained hundreds of books about Cherokee history, culture, and language, but also recordings of traditional songs, stories, and ceremonies. Mary pulled out a collection of old recordings made in the 1960s. "These are some of the last native speakers of Cherokee from this area," she explained. "We've been working to preserve these songs and stories for future generations." Willie listened to several recordings, struck by the similarity between these ancient Cherokee songs and the oldest country music he knew. Both traditions seemed to emerge from the same source: people trying to make sense of their lives through music, trying to preserve their stories and values in song. "There's something I need to tell you," Willie said to Mary. "I don't know much about Cherokee history. I'm embarrassed to say that everything I learned in school was probably wrong or incomplete." Mary smiled kindly. "Most Americans don't know real Cherokee history. Would you like to learn?" Willie nodded, and Mary spent the next hour sharing the true story of the Cherokee people, their sophisticated government and culture before European contact, the forced removal known as the Trail of Tears, the ongoing struggle to maintain their identity and sovereignty. She spoke without bitterness, but with a clear understanding of historical injustices. The Cherokee who stayed in the Southeast, like my ancestors, faced different challenges than those who were forced to move to Oklahoma, Mary explained. We had to become invisible to survive, blend in with white and black communities, practice our culture in secret, pass down our knowledge quietly from generation to generation. How did you keep the music alive? Grandmothers, Mary said simply. Always the grandmothers. They sang to their children and grandchildren, taught them the old songs even when it was dangerous to be Cherokee. That's how Sarah learned, and how she taught Daniel. After lunch, Daniel took Willie to a workshop space where traditional instruments were made and repaired. The room smelled of wood shavings and varnish, filled with half-finished flutes, drums, and rattles in various stages of completion. Want to try making something? Daniel asked. I wouldn't know where to start. Daniel selected a piece of cedar and handed Willie a simple knife. Start by just feeling the wood. Cherokee craftsmen believe that each piece of wood has its own spirit, its own purpose. Our job is to help it become what it's meant to be. Willie turned the piece of cedar in his hands, surprised by its warmth, and the subtle variations in grain and color. Under Daniel's patient guidance, he began to shape what would eventually become a simple flute. This is meditation, Willie realized as he worked. Like the morning songs, it's about being present, being connected. Everything is connected in Cherokee thinking, Daniel agreed. The tree that gave its wood, the person who cuts it, the hands that shape it, the breath that brings it to life. It's all part of one continuous cycle. As Willie worked, other community members drifted in and out of the workshop. Robert Ironcloud showed him traditional carving techniques passed down from his grandfather. Tom Eaglefeather, the teenager from Dallas, demonstrated how to properly season wood for instrument making. Mr. Nelson, Tom said as they worked, can I ask you something? Sure. What was it like when you first started playing music? Before you were famous, I mean. Willie paused in his carving, remembering. It was like discovering fire, he said slowly. I'd play for anyone who'd listen. At church, at school, at family gatherings. It wasn't about getting paid or getting famous. It was about connecting, making people feel something. That's how I feel when I play traditional Cherokee songs, Tom said. Like I'm connecting with something ancient and important. Hold on to that feeling, Willie advised. Don't let anyone tell you it's not practical or profitable. That connection is what makes music matter. That evening, Sarah announced that there would be a community gathering. Not a formal ceremony, but an informal sharing of songs and stories. Word spread quickly through the small community, and by sunset, the amphitheater was filled with Cherokee families and a few non-Cherokee friends and neighbors. Would you like to share a song, Willie? Sarah asked as the gathering began. Willie felt a flutter of nervousness he hadn't experienced in decades. This wasn't a concert audience that had paid to hear Willie Nelson perform hits. This was a community inviting him to participate in their tradition of sharing. I'd be honored, he said, but I'd like to try something different if that's okay. He retrieved his guitar from the van and returned to the amphitheater. Instead of launching into one of his well-known songs, he began with the simple melody he'd played on Sarah's flute the night before. The sound of Willie Nelson without the brand, without the expectations, without anything but the pure desire to connect through music. The melody was simple, wordless, but it seemed to carry all of Willie's decades of joy and sorrow, hope and disappointment. As he played, he felt the presence of the Cherokee community around him. not as an audience, but as participants in the music itself. When he finished, the silence was profound and appreciative. Then Daniel began to sing a Cherokee song that seemed to respond to Willie's melody, and other voices joined in, creating a spontaneous harmony that bridged cultures and generations. Later, as the evening wound down and community members began to drift home, Willie found himself sitting by the dying fire with Sarah, Daniel, and a few others. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me be part of this." "You've always been part of this," Sarah replied. "Music is music. Connection is connection. The forms may be different, but the spirit is the same." "I have a confession," Willie said. "When I came here, I was thinking about retiring. I've been feeling like my music doesn't matter anymore, like I'm just going through the motions." "And now?" Daniel asked. Willie looked around at the faces illuminated by firelight. People who had welcomed him without expecting anything in return, who had shared their most precious traditions with a stranger, who had reminded him why music mattered in the first place. "Now, I think I understand what I've been missing," he said. "I've been so focused on performing Willie Nelson that I forgot how to be Willie Nelson. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Sarah said. "The question is, what are you going to do with that understanding?" Willie stared into the fire, watching the flames dance against the Texas stars. For the first time in years, he felt like he had something important to learn, something meaningful to contribute. The thought of returning to Nashville, to the endless cycle of touring and recording and promoting, felt like putting on clothes that no longer fit. "I don't know yet," he said honestly, "but I know I'm not ready to leave here. Not yet." Sarah smiled and patted his knee gently. "Then, don't leave. Stay as long as you need to. Learn what you came here to learn." As Willie made his way back to the guest room, his phone buzzed with another call from Bobby Henderson. He looked at the screen for a moment, then turned the phone off without answering. Whatever crisis was waiting in Nashville would have to wait a little longer. He had more important things to do, like learning to be Willie Nelson again instead of just playing him. 3 weeks had passed since Willie's arrival at the Cherokee Cultural Center, and the rhythm of community life had begun to feel natural. He woke each morning to join the sunrise songs, spent his days learning traditional crafts and Cherokee history, and ended each evening around the fire sharing music and stories. His hands, which had trembled with age and exhaustion when he first arrived, had grown steady again from working with wood and traditional instruments. Bobby Henderson had called 17 more times. Willie's phone now stayed permanently turned off. "You're different," Daniel observed, as they walked through the community gardens, checking on the late summer vegetables that would soon be harvested for the fall celebration. "Calmer, more present." "I feel different," Willie admitted, "like I've been holding my breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale." They stopped beside a patch of traditional Cherokee plants, corn, beans, and squash, growing together in the ancient pattern called the Three Sisters. Mary Sunflower had explained that the three plants supported each other. Corn provided a structure for beans to climb, beans fixed nitrogen in the soil for corn and squash leaves shaded the ground to retain moisture for all three. "Everything connected," Willie murmured, remembering Mary's words. "That's the Cherokee way," Daniel agreed. "But it's not just Cherokee. Most indigenous peoples understood this. Even early country music had that understanding. Songs about community, family, the land, working together to survive." Willie knelt and touched the soil, rich and dark from generations of careful tending. When did we lose that? When did music become about individual success instead of community connection? "Same time everything else got broken," Daniel said sadly, "when profit became more important than relationship." when growth became more important than sustainability, when competition became more important than cooperation. That afternoon, Sarah called Willie to her private office in the cultural center. The small room was lined with photographs spanning generations, Cherokee families, traditional ceremonies, and moments of community life stretching back decades. "Sit down, Willie," Sarah said, her tone more serious than usual. "We need to talk." Willie settled into the familiar chair across from her desk, noticing for the first time how tired Sarah looked. Her usual vitality seemed diminished, and there were new lines of worry around her eyes. "What's wrong, Sarah?" She sighed deeply and pulled out a folder filled with official-looking documents. "The state wants to build a highway through our land. They say it's for economic development, to connect the small towns in this area with the interstate system." Willie felt his stomach drop. Can they do that? They're claiming eminent domain. 20 acres of our land, including the amphitheater, and half the gardens. Sarah's voice was steady, but Willie could hear the pain beneath her calm exterior. They're offering compensation, of course. Fair market value, they call it. What will you do? Fight it, naturally. But fighting takes money, and time, and energy. And our community isn't wealthy. The lawyer we consulted says our chances aren't good. The state can usually take what it wants, if it can prove public benefit. Willie stared at the documents, feeling anger rise in his chest. "This is wrong, Sarah. This place is sacred. It's not just land, it's where your community comes together, where you preserve your culture. The state doesn't see it that way. To them, it's just undeveloped property that happens to be in the path of their highway project." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she closed the folder. "I'm 78 years old, Willie. I've fought battles my whole life. Fought to preserve Cherokee language when schools tried to beat it out of our children. Fought to maintain our cultural practices when the government tried to assimilate us. Fought to keep our families together when poverty tried to scatter us to the cities. You can't give up now." "I'm not giving up, but I'm tired. And I'm realistic. This center represents 15 years of work. But if we lose this fight, we lose everything." Willie felt something crystallizing inside him, a clarity of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. What if you had help? Resources, publicity, legal support. Sarah looked at him carefully. "What are you thinking, Willie?" "I'm thinking that maybe this is why I came here. Not just to find myself, but to find a way to use whatever influence I have for something that matters." Before Sarah could respond, Daniel burst into the office, his face flushed with excitement and worry. "Grandmother, there's a reporter here. Says she's from the Austin American-Statesman. Someone must have leaked the highway story." Through the office window, Willie could see a young woman with a notebook and camera talking to Robert Ironcloud near the amphitheater. Even from a distance, he could tell the conversation wasn't going well. Robert's body language suggested suspicion and defensiveness. "I'll handle this," Sarah said, rising from her chair. "Wait," Willie touched her arm gently. "Let me go with you. It's time I stopped hiding from the world." The reporter, Jessica Martinez, was professional but clearly out of her element in the rural Cherokee community. She brightened when she recognized Willie, though she tried to maintain journalistic composure. "Mr. Nelson, I'm Jessica Martinez from the Austin paper. I'm here investigating the proposed highway project, but I have to ask, what brings Willie Nelson to a Cherokee cultural center in East Texas?" Willie glanced at Sarah, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I came here to learn," he said simply. "And I've learned that some things are too important to lose." "Are you referring to the highway dispute?" "I'm referring to the fact that this community has spent 15 years building something beautiful and meaningful, and the state wants to destroy it for a highway that will primarily benefit commercial truck traffic." Jessica's pen moved quickly across her notebook. So you oppose the highway project? I oppose the mindless destruction of communities in the name of economic development. There has to be a better way to improve transportation in East Texas than bulldozing sacred ground. The interview continued for 20 minutes, with Willie speaking more passionately about social issues than he had in years. He talked about the Cherokee community's commitment to preserving culture, about the importance of places where people could connect with their heritage, about the value of community over commerce. When Jessica left, promising to run the story in the next day's paper, Sarah turned to Willie with a mixture of gratitude and concern. That was brave of you, Willie. But are you prepared for what comes next? Once that story runs, you'll be associated with this fight, whether you want to be or not. Good, Willie said firmly. I should have been using my platform for things like this all along instead of just selling concert tickets. That evening, word of Willie's support spread quickly through the Cherokee community. The fire circle was more crowded than usual, with families coming from neighboring counties to show solidarity and hear music. But the mood was different, more urgent, more purposeful. I want to share something with you tonight, Sarah announced as the formal program began. A song that my grandmother taught me, that her grandmother taught her. It's called The Song of the Long Path, and it tells the story of our people's journey from the old homeland to this place. Sarah's voice, rich with age and experience, filled the amphitheater as she sang in Cherokee. Even without understanding the words, Willie could feel the song's power. It carried the weight of history, the pain of loss, and the strength that comes from enduring. When she finished, Daniel spoke quietly to the gathered community. My grandmother learned this song from the last generation that remembered the Trail of Tears firsthand. It's not just a song about the past. It's a song about survival, about carrying our culture forward, no matter what tries to stop us. Which is why, Sarah added, it seems appropriate to share it with someone who's become part of our community, someone who understands that music can be medicine for wounded spirits. She turned to Willie, her eyes bright with purpose. Willie Nelson, would you learn the Song of the Long Path? The invitation felt ceremonial, weighted with meaning Willie didn't fully understand, but deeply respected. I would be honored, Sarah. What followed was unlike any music lesson Willie had ever experienced. Sarah didn't simply teach him the melody and words. She shared the story behind each verse, the historical events that had shaped Cherokee experience, the spiritual beliefs that gave the song its power. This verse is about leaving the old homeland, she explained, singing a haunting melody that seemed to carry the sound of weeping. Our ancestors had to abandon graves of their parents, sacred sites that had been holy for generations. This part describes the journey itself, Daniel added, his voice joining his grandmother's in harmony. The deaths along the way, the children who couldn't survive the forced march, the elders who chose to die rather than leave their homeland. And this, Sarah sang, her voice growing stronger, is about arriving here, about deciding to survive, to rebuild, to keep our culture alive in a new place. Willie listened with growing emotion. This wasn't just a song, it was a record of human resilience, a testament to the power of community to endure even the worst injustices. As he began to learn the melody, he felt he was being trusted with something sacred. The Cherokee words are important, Sarah explained, but the spirit of the song can be carried in any language. What matters is understanding what it represents. The refusal to be destroyed, the commitment to preserve what's most precious about human culture. Over the next several hours, Willie worked to master not just the melody, but the emotional journey the song represented. By the time the fire had burned low, and most of the community had gone home, he could sing the Song of the Long Path, with something approaching the depth Sarah had shown him. "There's something else," Sarah said as the evening wound down. "Tomorrow, we're holding a special ceremony. It's not traditional Cherokee. We're creating something new, something that honors both our heritage and our current struggle." "What kind of ceremony?" "A commitment ceremony. People from the community are going to pledge to do whatever it takes to save this place. Some will offer money, some will offer time, some will offer skills. But everyone will offer something." Willie understood immediately. "You're asking if I'll participate. I'm asking if you're ready to make this fight your fight too." Willie looked around the amphitheater, imagining bulldozers tearing through the carefully tended gardens, destroying the fire circle where he'd found his connection to music again. The thought filled him with rage and determination in equal measure. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I'm ready." The next morning brought reporters from Dallas, Houston, and even Nashville. Word had spread that Willie Nelson was involved in a David and Goliath fight against government overreach, and the story had captured media attention across Texas and beyond. Bobby Henderson's car was parked outside the cultural center when Willie emerged from the guest room. "Jesus Christ, Willie!" Bobby exploded as soon as he saw him. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The record label is furious. The tour promoters are threatening to sue, and half of Nashville thinks you've lost your mind." "Maybe I have," Willie replied calmly. "Maybe losing my mind was exactly what I needed to do." "This isn't a joke. You're Willie Nelson. You can't just disappear for a month and then surface as some kind of political activist." "I'm not political, Bobby. I'm just standing with people I care about." Bobby followed Willie toward the main building, his voice growing more frantic. "People you care about? You've known these people for 3 weeks. You've got responsibilities, contracts, people depending on you." Willie stopped and turned to face his manager. This man who had been part of his professional life for over a decade. "Bobby, when was the last time you saw me happy? Really happy, not just going through the motions?" Bobby paused, caught off guard by the question. What does happiness have to do with anything? You're successful. You're respected. You're making good money. That's not what I asked." Bobby's shoulders sagged slightly. "I don't know, Willie. Maybe not for a few years. But that's just part of getting older. Part of the business. No, it's not. I've been happy here, Bobby. For the first time in years, I've remembered why music matters." The commitment ceremony that afternoon was unlike anything Willie had ever experienced. One by one, community members stood to pledge their support for the fight to save the cultural center. A retired teacher offered to organize letter-writing campaigns. A local mechanic promised to donate his services to anyone working on the legal challenge. Teenagers volunteered to manage social media outreach. When Willie's turn came, he stood before the community that had welcomed him and changed his life. "I pledge my name, my resources, and my platform to this fight," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater. "But more than that, I pledge to use whatever time I have left to support communities like this one, places where people come together to preserve what's most precious about human culture." The ceremony concluded with Willie and the entire community singing the Song of the Long Path together, Cherokee voices and his Texas drawl blending into something entirely new but deeply rooted in tradition. That evening, as media vans lined the road outside the cultural center and reporters clamored for interviews, Willie sat with Sarah in her private office. "You know this changes everything for you," she said gently. "There's no going back to the way things were." Willie nodded. "I know, and I'm scared as hell, but I'm also more excited about the future than I've been in years." "What will you do? About your career, I mean." Willie was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know yet, but I know I can't go back to just being Willie Nelson the brand. I want to be Willie Nelson, the person who stands for something, who uses his music to bring people together instead of just entertaining them. Sarah smiled and reached for a small wooden box on her desk. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, was the cedar flute he'd heard her play his first night at the center. "This was my husband Thomas's favorite flute," she said, offering it to Willie. "He would want you to have it." Willie accepted the gift with trembling hands. "Sarah, I can't." "Yes, you can. Thomas always said that gifts are meant to be passed along, not hoarded. This flute has music left in it, and you're the person meant to find that music." As Willie held the flute, feeling its weight and warmth, he realized that his journey to the Cherokee Cultural Center had been about more than finding his artistic inspiration. It had been about finding his purpose, his true calling as both a musician and a human being. The highway fight would be long and difficult. His career would face serious challenges. Some fans would be angry. Some industry executives would be furious, and some critics would accuse him of going soft or selling out to political correctness. But for the first time in years, Willie Nelson knew exactly who he was and what he stood for. And that knowledge, he realized, was worth more than all the platinum albums and sold-out concerts in the world. 6 months later, Willie stood on the stage of the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, looking out at an audience that had no idea what they were about to experience. The venue was packed, as always, but tonight felt different. This wasn't just another Willie Nelson concert. It was a homecoming, a reckoning, and a new beginning all at once. "Good evening, Nashville," he said into the microphone, his voice carrying the same weathered authenticity it always had. "Before we get started tonight, I want to tell you about some friends of mine in East Texas." A murmur ran through the audience. This wasn't how Willie Nelson concerts usually began. Behind him, Daniel Running Bear sat with his guitar, while Sarah Whitehorse occupied a place of honor in a comfortable chair. They had flown in from Texas specifically for this show, the culmination of months of planning and preparation. "Last year, I was lost," Willie continued. "I'd been playing music for over 60 years, but somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten why it mattered. So I took a drive, and I ended up at a Cherokee Cultural Center where I met these folks behind me. They taught me something I'd forgotten, that music isn't just entertainment. It's medicine. It's connection. It's how we remember who we are and who we're supposed to be." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. 6 months ago, the state of Texas tried to take their land to build a highway. We fought that, and we won. But the real victory wasn't legal. It was personal. I remembered why I picked up a guitar in the first place. Willie turned to Daniel and nodded. Together, they began to play "The Song of the Long Path," Willie singing in English while Daniel sang in Cherokee. The song had evolved over the months of their collaboration, becoming something that honored both Cherokee tradition and the country music roots that had shaped Willie's life. The audience was mesmerized. This wasn't the Willie Nelson they expected. This was something deeper, more connected, more purposeful than anything he'd done in years. The concert that followed was unlike any Willie had ever performed. Yes, he played the hits that people came to hear. "On the Road Again," "Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys," "Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain." But between the familiar songs, he wove stories about the Cherokee community, about the importance of preserving cultural traditions, about the connections between all forms of American roots music. Country music and Cherokee music, he told the audience, both came from the same place. People trying to make sense of their lives, trying to preserve their stories, trying to stay connected to what matters most. The response was extraordinary. When Willie and Daniel performed a Cherokee-influenced version of "Will the Circle Be Unbroken," the entire audience sang along, creating a moment of connection that transcended cultural boundaries. After the show, backstage was chaos. Record executives, promoters, journalists, and fans all clamored for Willie's attention. But he found himself gravitating toward Sarah, who sat quietly in the corner, watching the commotion with amused eyes. "How do you feel?" she asked when he sat down beside her. "Like myself again," Willie replied. "For the first time in years, like myself." "And tomorrow? Next week? Next year?" Willie considered the question carefully. Over the past 6 months, everything about his career had changed. He'd canceled the traditional touring schedule, instead organizing smaller concerts in communities like the Cherokee Center. Shows that were less about entertainment and more about cultural exchange and community building. The mainstream music industry had been predictably resistant. Some radio stations had stopped playing his music, calling his new direction too political. Some longtime fans had complained that he'd abandoned his roots. But something unexpected had happened. A new audience had emerged, younger and more diverse, drawn to music that seemed to stand for something beyond commercial success. "I don't know about next year," Willie admitted, "but I know I can't go back to the way things were. This feels too important." Bobby Henderson approached, his expression a mixture of frustration and grudging admiration. Over the past months, their relationship had been strained as Willie insisted on pursuing projects that made sense artistically, but not always commercially. "The response has been incredible, Willie," Bobby said. 3 major networks want to do documentaries about your work with indigenous communities. Rolling Stone wants to do a cover story. And believe it or not, ticket sales for the community concerts are through the roof." "That's nice, Bobby, but it's not why we're doing this." I know, but it's nice to know that doing the right thing can also be good business." Willie smiled at his manager's grudging evolution. Bobby would probably never fully understand the spiritual dimension of Willie's transformation, but he was learning to support it professionally. 3 weeks later, Willie found himself back at the Cherokee Cultural Center, this time for the annual harvest celebration. The event had grown significantly since the highway fight, drawing visitors from across Texas and beyond who wanted to experience authentic Cherokee culture. The amphitheater was packed with a mix of Cherokee community members and visitors of all backgrounds. Willie performed with local musicians, but he also spent time teaching workshops on the connections between different American musical traditions. "Music is like a river," he told a group of young people during an afternoon session. "It starts in different places, flows through different landscapes, but eventually all the streams connect. Cherokee music, country music, blues, gospel, they're all part of the same current." Tom Eaglefeather, now in his 2nd year of college but still spending summers at the Cultural Center, raised his hand. "Mr. Nelson, how do you stay authentic when you're mixing different traditions? How do you honor both without appropriating?" It was a sophisticated question that showed how much the young man had grown in his understanding of cultural complexity. "That's the key word, honor," Willie replied. "You learn from teachers like Sarah and Daniel. You listen more than you speak. And you always remember that you're a guest in someone else's cultural space. You don't take, you receive what's offered, and you give back in return." Daniel, who was co-teaching the workshop, nodded approvingly. Willie's approach has been perfect. He's learned our traditions not to use them, but to understand them. And in return, he's shared his knowledge of country music with our young people. It's been a real cultural exchange. That evening, as the harvest celebration reached its peak, Willie found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. A year ago, he'd been going through the motions of being a country music legend, successful but spiritually empty. Now, he was part of something larger, a movement to preserve and honor the cultural traditions that made American music so rich and diverse. Sarah approached him as he sat by the fire, watching young Cherokee dancers perform traditional dances while a mixed band of Cherokee and country musicians provided accompaniment. "Regrets?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. Willie considered the question seriously. His transformation hadn't been without costs. Some old friendships had been strained. His relationship with parts of the music industry had become complicated. He'd lost some fans while gaining others. "No regrets," he said finally. "For the first time in my adult life, I feel like I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing." "And what's that?" "Using music to bring people together instead of just entertaining them. Using whatever platform I have to support communities like this one. Remembering that success isn't just about how many records you sell or how many tickets you move." Sarah smiled and pulled out a letter from her purse. "Speaking of success, I thought you'd like to see this." The letter was from the National Endowment for the Arts, officially recognizing the Cherokee Cultural Center as a National Heritage Site. The recognition came with significant funding and protection from future development threats. "Sarah, this is incredible. It wouldn't have happened without your help. Your support brought national attention to what we're doing here, and that attention brought official recognition." Willie felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with chart positions or Grammy nominations. This was the kind of success that actually mattered, helping preserve something beautiful and important for future generations. As the evening wound down, Daniel joined them by the fire. "Willie, I've been thinking about something. You've learned so much about Cherokee culture, and you've shared so much of your knowledge with us. What if we formalized it somehow?" "What do you mean?" "What if we started a program that brings different musicians here to learn about Cherokee traditions, and also takes Cherokee musicians to other communities to share our culture? A real cultural exchange program." Willie's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant, Daniel. We could partner with music schools, cultural organizations, other indigenous communities." Sarah listened to the two men plan, her heart full of pride and satisfaction. When Willie had first arrived at the Cultural Center, she'd sensed he was looking for something, though she hadn't been sure what. Now she understood that he'd been looking for purpose, a way to use his gifts in service of something larger than personal success. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, interrupting their planning session. "Willie, the community has been talking, and we'd like to make you an honorary member of our Cherokee family. It's not something we do lightly, and it doesn't make you Cherokee. Nothing can do that. But it would recognize your commitment to our community and our culture." Willie felt his eyes filling with tears. "Sarah, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Your actions have already said everything that needs to be said." 6 months later, Willie stood once again on a stage, this time at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. He was there to perform at a gala celebrating American cultural diversity, sharing the bill with musicians from dozens of different traditions: Native American, African American, Latino, Asian American, and many others. The performance he gave that night, a medley of "On the Road Again" and "The Song of the Long Path" that seamlessly wove together country and Cherokee musical traditions, would become one of the most celebrated moments of his career. But for Willie, the real victory wasn't the standing ovation or the critical acclaim. It was the knowledge that he'd found his way back to the reason he'd started making music in the first place: to connect people, to preserve and honor cultural traditions, and to use his gifts in service of something larger than himself. After the performance, as he stood in the wings watching other musicians celebrate America's cultural richness, Willie thought about the long path that had brought him here. It had started with a moment of despair on a Texas highway, a feeling that his life and music had lost their meaning. But sometimes, he reflected, Losing your way is the only way to find where you're supposed to be. The next morning, Willie would fly back to Texas, to the Cherokee Cultural Center that had become his second home. There, he would continue the work of building bridges between musical traditions, supporting communities fighting to preserve their cultural heritage, and using his music to remind people of their connections to each other and to the land that sustains them all. It wasn't the career path anyone would have predicted for Willie Nelson at age 89, but it was the path that had led him home to himself. And that made all the difference. As he walked out of the Kennedy Center into the Washington night, Willie pulled out the cedar flute Sarah had given him and played a few soft notes, not for any audience, but simply for the joy of making music under the stars. The sound drifted into the darkness, carrying with it all the hope and wisdom he'd learned from his Cherokee friends. The song was simple, wordless, and perfect. It was the sound of Willie Nelson, not the brand or the legend, but the person, finally at peace with who he was meant to be. And in that moment, surrounded by the lights of the nation's capital but thinking of a small amphitheater in East Texas, Willie Nelson knew that the long path he'd been traveling his entire life had finally led him home.